He remembered the moment the room went quiet, not because they respected him, but because they didn't believe he belonged there. The long conference table, the polished American boots resting casually on the floor, the smell of coffee that had gone cold from too many hours of debate. Everything was ordinary until one officer leaned back, crossed his arms, and said the line that would travel with him for years. Filipinos can't fly Apache. The others chuckled softly, the kind of laugh that isn't loud but cuts deeper because it hides behind professionalism. And he stood there, a single Filipino pilot among a sea of uniforms, each bearing the weight of a country that was always seen as the superior one. Have you ever stood in a place where your presence alone felt like an argument? That was Captain Elias Reyes on that day, a young Filipino aviator invited to a joint training assessment with the United States Army. They thought he was only there to observe. In their eyes, Filipinos flew small, simple aircraft. Good for coastal patrols, they thought. Good for search and rescue. Good for humanitarian missions. But certainly not for one of the most complex, unforgiving attack helicopters in the world, the AH-64 Apache. The room wasn't hostile. It was worse. It was polite. Polite dismissal, polite skepticism, polite superiority. And maybe that's why it hit harder. One instructor even tapped the Apache manual with 2 fingers and said, "This machine is not for everyone, especially not for someone from a small archipelago." The word small lingered in the air, as if describing the nation itself. No one knew that beneath Elias's calm face was something heavier than pride. It was the quiet certainty of someone who had survived storms far beyond paperwork and protocol. But he stayed silent, because silence was its own language, and Filipinos understood the power of patience more than most people in that room ever would. Outside, rain tapped gently against the hangar walls, as though echoing the rhythm of his heartbeat. Steady, calm, waiting. Inside, he laid one hand on the table, feeling its cold surface, and wondered why they were so sure. Why would someone judge an entire people without ever seeing what they could do? Why did they always assume strength lived only in the biggest countries, the richest forces, the loudest voices? A question formed quietly, not in their minds, but in his. And it would grow louder with every breath he took. What would they say if the very person they underestimated was the one who would rewrite the expectations they believed were unbreakable? Because that day, in that room full of decorated experts and rigid opinions, something began. Not a fight, not an argument, something much more powerful, a story that would make every person there wonder if they had been wrong about Filipinos all along. They didn't know it then, but the real test, the one that would turn doubt into disbelief, was only waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. And when it came, no one, not even Elias, was prepared for how everything would change. People often underestimate the Philippines without ever realizing they're doing it. It isn't usually cruelty, it's history. It's bias passed down quietly, built from decades of seeing the West as the teacher and the rest of the world as the student. To them, American soldiers were born and raised around advanced aircraft, surrounded by cutting-edge technology and endless resources. The Philippines, on the other hand, was the place they visited on vacations, the place with beautiful beaches, warm smiles, and resilient people. But not the place where someone mastered the most complex attack helicopter on Earth. That was the unspoken belief running beneath the surface. Not one Filipino pilot in that room had ever trained directly on the Apache, not because they lacked skill, but because no one had ever given them access. Prejudice wasn't loud here, it was systemic, shaped by decades of imbalance, and the people around Elias looked at him with the quiet expectation of failure, an expectation shaped not by who he was, but by where he came from. During the first briefing, He felt it more than heard it. A whisper from the back. He won't last 10 minutes in the simulator. Then another voice, amused, not cruel but condescending. They're good with light helicopters, you know? Nimble stuff. But this is different. The laughter that followed wasn't loud, but it was enough to tighten something in his chest. He didn't react. Not outwardly. Filipinos rarely do. They've learned to hold dignity like a shield, to choose grace over confrontation. Instead, he studied the diagrams, the control layouts, the weapon interface systems. And as he did, he remembered the skies of Zamboanga, where he'd flown rescue missions through typhoons so violent they bent coconut trees to the ground. He remembered the training sessions that stretched deep into the night, the small base where outdated equipment forced pilots to become more creative, more adaptable, more focused than anyone expected. But they didn't know any of that. His first technical test came sooner than he expected. A simple system identification challenge, one designed to filter out candidates who didn't understand the Apache's logic. The instructors watched with folded arms, amused, waiting for the Filipino to stumble. A man named Walker even muttered, "Let's see how long he lasts." Elias sat down in the simulator, hands steady, eyes locked on the illuminated screens. The cockpit hummed around him. It wasn't noise. It was music to him. Back home, he had learned to sense the heartbeat of a helicopter through the vibrations in the seat, through the harmonics of the blades slicing air. Precision wasn't a luxury for Filipino pilots. It was survival. Still, the room around him expected failure. He felt their eyes like weights pressing on his shoulders. And yet, there was something else. A memory from years ago, when he was a trainee in the Philippines. A senior pilot had once told him, "A Filipino does not fear complexity. We grew up solving problems no one trained us for." As the simulation began, he breathed slowly, as though steadying himself for a storm. But the storm wasn't in the machine. It was in the expectations they had built around him. During the first sequence, the system threw a subtle anomaly, a deliberate trick to confuse the pilot. Elias caught it instantly, correcting with a movement so minimal that one instructor blinked in surprise. Another leaned forward, suddenly alert. But the disbelief in the room didn't disappear. It hardened. One correct decision could be luck. They expected him to falter soon. The next training session would be even harder. A tactical memory exercise, something notoriously difficult even for seasoned American pilots. He stood in the center of the room, alone in a crowd once more. The others whispered, watching him with quiet expectation. He won't get past the third rotation. There's no way he understands the sequencing. He didn't respond. He only nodded, stepped forward, and prepared. And yet, beneath his calm exterior, something deeper stirred. Not anger, but a quiet understanding. They had no idea who stood before them. They saw a Filipino pilot from a small archipelago. They never imagined he had already faced life-or-death missions they could not begin to imagine. They didn't know he had flown through smoke-filled valleys during conflict zones, or that he had evacuated soldiers under fire. They didn't know the storms he had navigated, or the nights he had spent repairing aircraft by hand because there were no spare parts. Most importantly, they didn't know that what they underestimated most was the Filipino spirit, the resilience that turns doubt into determination, the faith that makes even the impossible feel reachable, the quiet strength passed down from generations who never had it easy, but always found a way to rise. He stood there as the next assessment was about to begin. The instructors readied their clipboards. The room fell silent. And every eye turned toward him, the pilot they believed would fail first. What they didn't realize was that the moment they were waiting for, the moment they thought would break him, was about to reveal something none of them could have predicted. The silence before a test is its own kind of battlefield. Elias felt it as he stepped into the simulator again, not heavy but electric, as though the air itself was waiting to see what he would do. He could hear the faint hum of the systems warming beneath his hands. But behind him, he sensed the weight of skepticism pressing on his back. He reached for the controls. Nothing dramatic, nothing rushed. Just a calm, precise movement, so smooth that the room shifted without anyone speaking. One of the instructors raised an eyebrow. Another straightened his posture, suddenly more attentive. They didn't know why yet, but something about the way he touched the controls felt different, almost instinctive. The test began. A tactical scenario, far more complex than before. Terrain masking, threat evasion, rapid-fire decision-making. It was the kind of challenge designed to overwhelm pilots who relied on theoretical knowledge alone. And in that first instant, when the simulation threw a curveball straight at him, no one expected what happened next. He responded without hesitation, guiding the aircraft through a narrow virtual canyon, adjusting pitch, power, and angle with a level of finesse that stunned the room into stillness. It wasn't showmanship. It was mastery. The kind of mastery born from experience, not privilege. Born from flying in the unpredictable skies of Mindanao and the unforgiving winds of the Visayas. Born from training environments where every mistake could cost more than points on a screen. The instructors leaned closer. They watched as he anticipated system behavior before the problem even appeared. They watched as he navigated threats with a quiet confidence that didn't need validation. They watched as every assumption they held began to tremble beneath the weight of what they were witnessing. For the first time since he arrived, no one laughed. In fact, no one spoke at all. The simulation escalated. A sudden engine anomaly, a weapons system recalibration, a hostile radar lock. These were scenarios designed to make even experienced pilots break focus. But Elias didn't break. His hands flowed across the controls like music, soft, precise, intentional. Every movement had purpose, every correction had logic, and the longer he flew, the more the room felt the shift. One instructor whispered, "How is he doing that?" Another replied, almost breathless, "Watch his timing. That's not beginner timing." And just like that, the transformation began. Doubt became curiosity. Curiosity became realization. Realization became respect. The loudest skeptic, Major Walker, stepped closer, arms unfolding slowly. His eyes narrowed, not in criticism, but in concentration. It was as if he needed to see more clearly, to question everything he had ever believed about where skill comes from, and who has the right to master the world's most advanced aircraft. The turning point arrived without warning. A final sequence, the hardest one. High threat, multi-target, low visibility, systems failing one by one. A sequence where most pilots panicked. Elias didn't panic. He steadied himself, inhaled slowly, and executed a maneuver so calculated yet fluid that one of the senior trainers whispered, "My God, that's advanced level instinct." It wasn't instinct. It was Filipino discipline, Filipino resilience, Filipino heart. The simulation ended abruptly, the screen fading to black. The room stayed silent long after the hum of the machine powered down. The instructors looked at one another, uncertain how to process what they had just seen. No one expected this. No one expected him. The man who mocked him earlier took a step forward before stopping himself, as though unsure what to say or how to say it. The shift was complete, from dismissal to awe. But even then, Elias hadn't shown his strongest skill. He hadn't revealed the one thing that would turn shock into absolute disbelief. And as he stepped out of the simulator, wiping a small bead of sweat from his eyebrow, he sensed that the real moment, the moment that would change the entire room, was only beginning. Because what happened next wouldn't just surprise them. It would redefine everything they believed about the Filipino capability. The final evaluation wasn't supposed to be dramatic. It was a simple demonstration exercise, something the trainers used to gauge how deeply a pilot understood the Apache's logic. But by the time Elias walked toward the aircraft mock-up, the atmosphere had shifted so completely that even the air felt different. No one joked now. No one whispered. Every instructor who earlier doubted him stood quietly, waiting for the Filipino pilot who had already shaken their expectations to take the next step. He placed one hand on the side panel of the Apache interface, not with arrogance, but with reverence. It was the same way he touched helicopters back home, with respect for the machine and for the lives it protected. And as he began the demonstration, something extraordinary unfolded. He executed the entire sequence flawlessly. Not just correctly, flawlessly. The weapon systems check, the sensor override. The initialization pattern that American pilots often needed years to perfect. He completed all of it with the confidence of someone who didn't just memorize the process but understood its pulse. A sharp intake of breath came from the back of the room. He wasn't done. They asked him to perform an advanced diagnostic, a task pilots usually left to technicians. To their shock, he completed it too. Without hesitation, without error, without even breaking the calm expression on his face. The foreign officers watched in stunned silence. Some leaned forward, others exchanged glances, eyes widening with every step he took. And slowly, the realization settled over the room like a heavy but beautiful truth. They had been wrong. The one they dismissed. The one they underestimated. The one they believed came from a nation too small, too humble, too far outside their world of high technology and military might, was standing before them mastering their most complex aircraft with a grace they had never seen. Major Walker finally spoke. Not loudly, not defensively, but quietly, almost humbled. If this is Filipino training, then the world has a lot to learn from you. The room fell even quieter. And then it happened. The moment that belonged not just to Elias, but to every Filipino watching from afar. A slow applause began from the senior instructor. Then another. And another. Until the whole room joined, not out of formality, but out of genuine respect. The sound echoed through the hangar like a salute, not to the United States, not to the aircraft, but to the Filipino standing at the center, because that strike of truth proved something deeper than skill. Filipinos were never beneath anyone. They were never less capable. They were never outmatched. What the world often failed to see was the heart behind every Filipino achievement. The resilience carved from surviving typhoons, the discipline learned from sacrifices, the humility that never demanded recognition but earned it through action. Elias didn't smile. He simply nodded, absorbing the moment with the same quiet dignity he carried from the start. And when he finally spoke, his voice held the calm certainty of someone not claiming victory, but speaking truth. We are capable. We always were. The senior instructor approached him, extended a hand, and said, "We misjudged the wrong man." But it wasn't just him they had misjudged. It was an entire nation. From that moment on, the story no longer belonged solely to Captain Elias Reyes. It became a testament to every Filipino pilot, engineer, soldier, nurse, teacher, worker, every Filipino who had ever been told they were not enough by people who never understood the depth of what they carried. It became a reminder that the world's strongest fighters do not always come from the biggest nations. Sometimes they come from islands shaped by storms, strengthened by faith, and united by a spirit that refuses to break. And in that quiet hangar, thousands of miles from home, a Filipino proved what the world should have known long ago. The Philippines does not ask for permission to be great. It simply rises, again and again, until no one can deny it.